Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses the potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rodgers with VFIS Client Risk Solutions, and today we're discussing fleet maintenance and emergency services. Joining me on the program today are Blair Tyndall and Bryan Duquin from the Client Risk Solutions team. Blair and Bryan are here to provide some suggestions when developing your fleet maintenance procedures. Blair, Bryan, I want to thank you both for joining me again, and it's a pleasure to have you back on the program.
Thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure to be back.
Thanks, Chris. Happy to be back.
Good to hear. So, Bryan, I'm going to start the questions off with you. It's a short one. Why is vehicle maintenance important?
Honestly, Chris, there's a few reasons why it's important. One is to really protect your organization, protect your fleet, making sure that the vehicle is safe to operate. It's protecting you from a liability standpoint to make sure that the vehicle is roadworthy, making sure that we're getting the incident safely from a vehicle maintenance perspective and a vehicle function perspective, and really just making sure that the organization has a plan in place to protect its assets. That's one of the largest and most expensive pieces of equipment. So when you start looking at how do you replace them, when do you replace them, why do you replace them, a good comprehensive vehicle maintenance program is going to help you answer all of those questions.
Even more important now with how hard it is to get an apparatus.
Absolutely.
The 3-year wait or whatever it is today. So what is the process for performing a comprehensive inspection?
Well, Chris, there are several things. This is a multifaceted question, and there are several things that we need to consider. So as a mix of our customers, are both career, all volunteer, some of them combination, you just need to develop a regular schedule. We hear more into career organizations a daily checklist, but that's not feasible for some of our customers. So, weekly, bi-weekly, picking a day like it's a training night, doing that up front, those kinds of things, picking a particular Saturday to do, vehicle checks and maintenances on the all volunteer side. But as long as you have a routine and you stick to that routine and you can, more or less uphold and defend that cycle, if you would ever be questioned, such as in a court of law, that you do them regularly and that you never miss anything. So, and there are a couple of different ways to record those. Of course, paper is the traditional method of having, vehicle inspections, storing those records inside a 3-ring binder or something like that. And then there are many electronic programs out there today that go very in depth, even up to the level of taking pictures of the apparatus each day and those kinds of things.
So how long should we keep these records? How long should they be retained?
So for the length of that vehicle being in service, you want to make sure that as long as you own that vehicle, you can go back to day one to be able to trace back any problems, trace back any issues, and just, again, from a liability standpoint, protect the organization.
So you're not talking from just a sales perspective, having records, but also potential future litigation perspective to have those records to let that authority having jurisdiction know that you're maintaining and inspecting that vehicle.
Absolutely. And it goes back to a conversation earlier is it also, through that preventive maintenance process, those documentation, it allows us to help determine when is it time to replace that vehicle. When it starts getting more expensive over time, we know that it's time to start considering it, if not making that move.
And I know a lot of departments are going to 48-96 shifts, so that the ones from my experience, they do beginning of shift checks versus doing daily checks. So there's a lot of dynamics in how these checks are done, and it's not a one size fits all for each organization. So what are the key components to consider when establishing a comprehensive maintenance program?
Well, Chris, I want to go back to one key thing as we talk about how this should be maintained, and that's what we call a closed loop system. So what we talk about is having these maintenance records, everything that's reported by the staff members that gets routed up to a vehicle maintenance person or gets routed up, in our larger organizations to a fleet manager, those kinds of things. Everything needs to be addressed, and it needs to have if you have a problem documented or a concern documented, it needs to be addressed, and that vehicle either needs to be taken out of service and repaired, or the problem should be evaluated, even documented no problem found, and it put back in service. So there needs to be a closed loop system, or what some people would relate to a work order system, a way to track those maintenances. Because if you end up in a litigation situation, the first thing they're going to subpoena in a vehicle litigation is the maintenance records of the vehicle, the training records of the driver. So since we're focusing today on vehicle maintenance, that's something that you don't want to have any holes in. You want to have great documentation, and you want to be able to prove that your process is working across the board and, has been pretty bulletproof as far as documentation is concerned.
How do we formalize that out of service process? It's easier to do with an electronic system because it'll trigger emails or some type of alerts to the fleet manager. But how do we tackle that?
Well, I think that's important to really develop a good process. So it can't just be electronic, because especially in your volunteer departments, at 3:00 in the morning, you're not going to remember about the text message or the email you got at 3:00 in the afternoon telling you that vehicle was out of service. So things like a bag over the steering wheel. One of the unique things I actually just saw in a department recently is they actually pull the apparatus nose in to the building, which represents that vehicle is out of service. So again, you got to figure out what is best for your organization, but it can't be just electronic, and it can't just be, it's on the whiteboard hanging in the back of the station that nobody looks at when they're responding into the station.
So we talked about some of the key components to have in a comprehensive maintenance program. How do aerial devices incorporate into that? We suggest annual testing, but there's also 5-year non-destructive testing. Can you kind of talk about the differences between the two?
So the non-destructive test is looking at that vehicle in much more depth, looking at the welds closer, looking at that vehicle to ensure that it is meeting the manufacturer's recommendations and industry standards. So that test should be performed every 5 years, and it should be done by a third-party firm that is qualified to perform those non-destructive tests.
And one of the key factors, just to delve deeper into the non-destructive test, there are a couple of kind of buzzwords or indicators on NDT. One is using a magnetic particle test. One is using a dye penetrant test. And the other is using an ultrasound device to check the ladders for cracks and for defects and those kinds of things. And it's really a safety thing for everybody, involved. The people using the ladder, obviously, the citizens, those kinds of things. Because aero devices are can be fairly hazardous when you're actually, in the throes of using the device.
What about tires? Some departments, they don't have the mileage where they're going to hit the NFPA recommended mileage, so they might go into they might have to focus on the years. How are tires integrated into this inspection process?
Well, the NFPA recommendation, Chris, is to replace tires every 7 years. No matter of their wear or tear and those kinds of things. And this can be, a pretty good budget hit, especially for our small to medium sized customers. And to the naked eye, you can go out and look at the tire and they look great. They only got 5,000 miles on them and those kinds of things. But we've had multiple incidences where that was a factor. And we actually have had some rollovers that were, after instant investigations were done, it was determined that it was, tires dry rotting and those kinds of things. They just don't get enough action. They can get, in our lower run departments, they can get flat spotted and those kinds of things, which causes unnecessary damage to the tire.
Well, and those tires are designed for over-the-road trucking. I mean, they're designed for heavy vehicles that are putting on, thousands and thousands of miles in a pretty short period of time. We're not seeing those miles in the fire apparatus. Even on a very busy, progressive department, you're never going to run those tires down under that 7-year mark. So, the dry rot is absolutely a very key component to that why that recommendation has been issued.
Tread depth, that's something that's easy to look at, but the other one you got to do a little bit more looking back at the purchase date or whatnot to figure that out. So who should be conducting the vehicle maintenance?
So, Chris, I want to take a step back, though. One of the other things, it's not just aerials, it's not just you looking at the tires, but through that comprehensive program looking at your entire fleet. So, if you have an engine, making sure that we're doing pump tests annually to make sure that it's meeting the industry standards, making sure that we're following a defined regimen PM system based on miles or based on how many hours that vehicle's been in service. Whatever the manufacturer recommends is really where we should be at with that preventive maintenance cycle. So those are really important things to really look at when you start to develop that comprehensive vehicle maintenance program, or to redefine it within your organization.
All good points, and I appreciate you going back and pointing those out, Bryan. So I'll ask it again. We've went through the checks, and now we need to have maintenance done on our rigs and our apparatus. Who should be conducting the vehicle maintenance?
So every organization's different. Some organizations have a dedicated fleet maintenance person that is internal, that's going to do, your oil changes, your brakes, your rotors, things like that. To somebody that may be certified, they may be an emergency vehicle technician, they may be ASE certified, and they may be specially trained by the manufacturer specifically. So you got to figure out with your organization where you fit into that mold, if you will. But at the end of the day, it needs to be somebody that understands those vehicles. It shouldn't be, the diesel mechanic who has never worked on an emergency vehicle before, or, the organizational members that they tinker in vehicle maintenance and tinker in fleet, but not certified in it, not practicing it regularly. Again, all of that's from a legal standpoint as well, to make sure that we have that good documentation and that we have the people that are qualified.
What are some of the things that we can do internally that, some of the low hanging fruit, like changing light bulbs, something like that, where we really don't need to get an EVT involved in something like that? What are some of the things that we can do in-house?
Yeah, there's a lot that can be done, especially, most of your organizations usually have someone that's a member that has some mechanical ability, if you will. Changing light bulbs, replacing small items, working on, things that are non-critical to the vehicle, like door hinges or, brackets on the fire apparatus that need to be tightened.
Bolt on, bolt off type things.
Yeah, bolt on, bolt off types of things. You just want to be careful because you are accepting some responsibility and liability when you start working on the actual operation of the vehicle, like safety devices and, brakes, tires, those kinds of things are where you start to ramp up into a different area of exposure.
But Blair, to go back to one of the things you talked about, is even those things need to be documented from a liability standpoint, because as you said, if we ever get into litigation, they're going to want everything from A to Z that's been performed on that vehicle. So even if it's just going in and tightening a bolt on a mount or replacing a light bulb, all of that stuff should be incorporated into your documentation from that vehicle maintenance perspective.
Agreed. And the other thing, too, that we've seen in the last probably 10 to 12 years is a really big push in the industry for mobile repairs. It's very cumbersome for any department, career, volunteer, or combination, to get vehicles to a particular location. So there are several vendors out there that come on site, and we just encourage our customers to have the same set of standards for those people as well. Don't be afraid of them because they're a mobile, emergency services repair vehicle, because they're all very qualified and certified. They just, happen to be mobile. So.
In my experience, a lot of them were EVTs that used to work for an organization and then went out and started their own gig on the side. So they're just as good as right. The EVT from a larger organization.
That's right. And there's obviously too, kind of the next topic, there's obviously too some benefit for the emergency services organization to utilizing warranties on vehicles and going back to the manufacturer on certain things, not on everything, but there's obviously some benefit there as long as the truck's still under warranty, or if there are recall issues or those kinds of things, you want to make sure you kind of follow that path just to protect the organization.
Well, gentlemen, it was a pleasure having you on. It's always good to speak with you all, and I really appreciate the great information. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Chris. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it as always.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. Also, I want to thank our guests Blair Tyndall and Bryan Duquin for their time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Also, if you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by emailing VFISriskcontrol@VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.